Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of B&H's virtual event space. My name is Fred. Today, I am happy to invite Isaac A. Grant, a lifelong birder and photographer. Welcome to the stage, Isaac.
Thank you.
So today, he's going to be talking about the ABCs of bird photography. For anyone attending through, if you have any questions, if you're watching through Zoom, if you could please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And if you're watching through Facebook, YouTube, or Vimeo, just enter your questions into the chat. At the end of his presentation, we'll be addressing those questions with Isaac. All right, so without further ado, Isaac, the stage is yours.
All right, thanks everyone for attending, taking time out of your day to hear my talk. Really appreciate it. I hope that you can learn something valuable to take into the field with you, something that you can use to help get better photos. So our agenda, I'm going to go through these things pretty quickly. We'll learn a little bit about me. We'll learn about some basics of bird photography. We'll learn what the ABCs are. We'll learn what the P's and Q's are. And we'll learn about an X factor. What we're not going to talk about is exposure. I'm going to assume that you can get proper exposure on your photos. We're not going to talk about camera settings. Those are all in a completely separate talk. I'm going to assume that you know how to use your camera, that you can pick it up, that you have basic photography skills, you can see a bird, you can identify what you're photographing, you can get proper exposure, you can get a sharp photo. That'll be the baseline of where we start. From there, how do we get a better photo? So what we're going to talk about are some techniques to improve the quality of the final image. We're going to talk about what to look for in the field to help produce a better background. We're going to talk about photographing birds in the right place at the right time. We're going to talk about using light to enhance your photos. We're going to talk about using your gear to get the best possible results. And we're going to be talking about searching for an X factor. A little bit about me. I'm married to my college sweetheart, Roxanne. Can't say enough about how supportive she is for all my early mornings and late evenings and what we like to call birding 911s, running out to see something. Father of two teenage boys, Lathan and Ryan, and I've got a sweet dog that I use a lot named Luna. We go for walks and I go scouting with her all the time. Quick story, I was raised by a birder. I kind of exist because of birds. My dad is a birder. His friend introduced him to a friend who introduced him to my mother. So my dad and mother met because of a birder, and here I am. I've been birding my whole life. I've traveled around the world looking for birds. I've seen thousands of species of birds, been to, 20, 25 countries. I know all the calls. I know their sounds. I know their habits. I know their tendencies. And these are all things that you can use as a tool to get better photos. A little bit more about me. Top slide is I'm #1 all time for birds seen on Staten Island in New York, where I live. I've actually seen 2 more species recently. That number is 339. I'm #5 all time for most birds seen in New York State. Again, these are just experiences and tools that I can call on for any number of species that I'm trying to photograph that I've seen, I've spent time with, I've watched them, I've listened to them, and these are all tools that you can use to help you get better photos. Let's talk gear for a minute. You can get a fantastic photo with any brand, any camera. It's what really you do behind the camera that makes most of the difference. But for me, what I use is a Sony A1. I shot Canon and Nikon in the past. The Sony A1 is it's like a dream come true. I mean, it's so light, it's so fast. I can shoot 20 or 30 frames per second raw. The autofocus is out of this world. I do most of my shooting with the Sony 600 f4. I also have a Sony 400 2.8 for when something's close or it's very low light. Again, this gear is just, for me, the absolute perfect tool to get the best photo. But of course, you don't need to have any specific brand. This just helps me time and time again. Okay, basics. We're going to go over the basics. Like I said, the baseline of this is we can get a sharp, well-exposed photo of a bird. You know what it is, and we go from there. So what are these basics? Well, pretty simple. It's got to have a bird. Bird photo needs a bird. Needs to be in focus. Yes, there are exceptions to these type of things. People like to do blurs or those sort of things, but I'm talking about a standard bird photo. Should have a bird, should be in focus, should be well exposed. But what do we do from there that makes the difference? And I'll say one more time, we're doing bird photography. So you need to learn the birds. The more you know about the birds, the better your photos are going to be. You know, if you know their calls, you can get out of your car. If you walk into the woods somewhere and say you're looking to photograph a specific species of warbler, oftentimes there are 5 or 6 kind of warblers that nest in the same habitat. You want to be able to listen and, you know, put all of your attention as to the bird that you're looking for. Habits, and we can do a whole talk on bird habits, but the more you know about habits, the more you can get a better photo. For instance, if you're watching a raptor and all of a sudden it turns around and oops, lightens the load a little bit, you know it's going to fly. You can quickly change your shutter speed. You can quickly adjust your exposure to make sure that when it flies, you can get it flying with its wings up and wings down. You can get a more dynamic pose. Same thing goes if you're watching, say, a shorebird bathing. You know that when it's done with its bath, it's going to flap its wings and fly up and go 2 or 3 feet in one direction or the other. But you can, once you know that they're going to do that every time, you can adjust your exposure, you can adjust your shutter speed, and you can be able to get a much more interesting photo with water splashing everywhere, things like that. Where and when to photograph birds. Again, this is a whole talk. But where is not necessarily as obvious as it may seem. There are places that I call birding places, places like national wildlife refuges, places where you can see tons of birds, but maybe you can't go off the path. Maybe you can't get to water level. There are places you can get really good photos that at first may not be obvious. Puddles in parking lots, or you know, just on the side of the road. Places where you can go off path, where you can do what you want to do in order to be able to get a better photo, to get the background you want and things like that. And what's the best time of year to photograph a bird? You know, if you want to get a photo of a baby loon on its parent's back, well, you need to know where those loons are. You need to know when they have eggs, when those eggs hatch, and you need to be able to be there at the right time. Same goes if you want to photograph, say, a black-bellied plover or a red knot in breeding plumage. They're completely different birds in winter plumage. So you need to know when they're going to have that breeding plumage, where they're going to be, and how to get that photo. So the more intimate knowledge you have of the birds, what they sound like, of where and when they're going to be, of where and when you can best photograph them, and, you know, specifically time of year for certain types of behavior, like it's the time of year where there's a lot of the beach nesting birds are having babies now. The more you know about that, the better you can do at getting photos. So how to turn a good photo into a great photo. I just want to emphasize that bird photography is an art. Photography is an art. And birds are really difficult to photograph. Birds in general, you know, don't want their picture taken, don't do what you want them to do, don't go where you want them to go. They're shy, many of them, they're elusive, they're in dark places, and it's very difficult to get a good photo. But we have to remember that photography is an art. And part of that art is not just the bird, it's the entire photo. So here we have a photo of a ruffed grouse-up. This is a pretty large in frame bird, but that ruffed grouse is maybe only 30, 35% of the total image. The rest of what you're looking for or looking at, the other 60%, is not a bird. And to me, the biggest way to make a difference and make a more beautiful photo is to concentrate on that other 65%. You can't forget 65% of your art. It's not just a bird that you're looking at the entire scene. So how we can turn a good photo into a great photo is by remembering that and working in the field at making a more beautiful photo. So let's take, to start, this photo of a prairie warbler. When you look at this photo, I want to ask a few basic questions. How do you feel about it? Is there anything you think that can be improved? Is there anything you think is fantastic? Is there anything you think isn't as good? And now we'll look at another photo of a prairie warbler. Clearly, you can see there's a difference in these. You have a bird that isn't obscured, it's in the open. He's singing. You have a background that's bright as opposed to one that's dark. You have a background that's free of distractions as opposed to dark lines and in focus and out of focused areas. This is the type of thing that I'm looking for. I'm looking for how to turn what's a nice, well-exposed photo into something better. Let's take this northern water thrush. When you look at this northern water thrush, is the background distracting? Does the shooting angle of how you've shot this bird help the bird stand out? Here's another shot of a northern water thrush, where you can see the background, as opposed to being dark and contrasty, is a green and yellowish patch of jewelweed in the distance. Really helps the bird stand out. The mossy rock that the bird is on is more interesting, and it just makes for a completely different scene. It was shot down at the bird's level as opposed to shooting down a little bit onto the bird. I'm at the level of the bird, shooting out. Here, we'll take a golden crown kinglet. I was standing about 5 feet next to a friend of mine. This is his photo. He was using a 100 to 500 lens with a converter. He was sort of shooting towards the line of bushes. There's a bit of that red ivy in the background that's sort of intersecting with the bird. I was about 5 feet to the right, very close to the edge of the bushes. I was shooting down parallel to the bushes, where the background was 20, 30 feet away, where there wasn't just one little piece of that red ivy, the entire bush was covered in that red ivy, which led to a completely different type of photo. I was shooting at f4, he was at whatever, I think f11. And so I have a soft, beautiful blurred background. He has a much more jittery, in focus, out of focus background. And these are the types of things where just moving 5 feet to the right, lining myself off in a different way, made a world of difference. So what are the ABCs? Let's get into that. These are the specifics. These are what we can do in the field to make the biggest difference. A, very simply stands for angle. B, very simply stands for background. And C is your composition. So the ABCs are your angle, your background, and your composition. For angle, I want to discuss 3 things. The first one being the angle between you and the bird. I always want to be at whatever level the bird is at. If the bird is on the water, I want my camera on the water. If the bird is in a bush, I want my camera at the level of that bird. Wherever that bird is, I want to very simply be lined up with that bird, where you can draw a straight line between that bird's eye and the camera. The angle between you, the bird, and the sun. Again, if you're shooting early in the morning or late in the evening, I've seen a lot of people not work in this way, but I want to be able to draw another straight line between the sun, my back, and the bird. Make it simple. I want to be able to point my shadow right at the bird. This does 2 things. It really enhances the colors of the bird, really brings out their iridescence or any colors that they have. It gives you no harsh shadows, and it really makes for a more pleasing photo. The third thing is your head angle or eye contact. I always want my bird to be looking at me. I want it more engaging. It's if you have eye contact, Yes, there are times that maybe if a bird is staring into a sunset, or if it's hunting, or if it's an osprey grabbing a fish, yes, of course, that's not going to be looking at you. But in general, I want some eye contact, and I want that bird looking at me. And these are things that make a huge difference. That shooting angle helps produce far better photos. So I'm going to go over some examples of how a shooting angle helps create a better photo. Here's Northern Shoveler. This was shot in the winter on a really cold day. There was a bunch of steep rocks angling down into the water. I set my camera and ground pod up in the water, where the camera was about 3 inches above the surface. I used my flip screen and focus that way, which is very simple to do on the A1. And that way I had my camera 3 inches above the water. I was shooting straight out. I have a distant, blurred background. The bird's looking right at me. All of the colors are brought out perfectly. All the iridescence, the greens, the reds, the blues in that Northern Shoveler. Here's an American kestrel. This is an unusually tame American kestrel. This bird is almost fearless. I'm not sure why she's that way, but she is. She likes to sit on a sign, and that sign is above my eye level. I had a stepladder with me. I was standing on a stepladder so that I could be at eye level with her. Standing on that stepladder did 2 things. 1, it made me eye level with her. 2, it made the background a distant field, which just turned into a beautiful blur. So she took off from her sign, which she did over and over again to go hunt grasshoppers, stared right at me. I've got eye contact. I'm right on the sun angle. There's no shadows. This is exactly the type of image I'm looking for. Here, Virginia rail. If you know Virginia rails, they are secretive, shy marsh birds. They're often very difficult to even see, let alone get a photo of. I did lots of scouting, walking with my dog, looking for a place where I can get down to their water level, get down to their level, photograph them in the open with a clean background. Again, I was laying on a pile of rocks in this case. I had my camera on my ground pod, photographing straight out. I'm eye level with this bird. It's looking right at me. It's walking. I was able to actually get tons of photos of this bird, but this is the sort of thing. The sun was at my back. There's no shadows on this bird. It's the exact type of photo that I'm looking for. Here's a purple gallinule photographed in Florida. If you've ever been to Florida, you've probably seen purple gallinules. The problem with photographing things at water level in Florida is alligators. There's lots of alligators in the freshwater. So it's very difficult to get a photo of a purple gallinule at water level in Florida. Well, I found a spot where I didn't see any alligators. I laid down on the bank, right arm in the water, holding the camera, photographed purple gallinule, which was walking in shallow water there. It was away from the background. Again, the photographing at water level, right on the sun angle, allows you to get all of those beautiful purples and greens and iridescence coming out on the bird. And it's looking at me. It's the exact type of photo I'm trying to get. Here's a warbling vireo. Any songbird you're trying to photograph often spends time up high in the trees. You need to find a way to photograph them at water level. I'm sorry, at eye level. It's difficult. People work with water drips. Some people work with setting up perches. People go to places where they feed birds. Whatever it is that you can do when you can get a photo of a bird at eye level, looking at you, calling, it's far more engaging. So the shooting angle is vitally important because it helps you be on the level with the bird. It helps you get a better background. And it helps you have a more engaging photo when you have that kind of eye contact. So B, background. How does the background help us? Well, for me, the background should be complementary to the bird. We go back to that northern water thrush image in the beginning. I don't want a dark, shadowy background. I don't want lots of distractions. I don't want any of that stuff. I want something beautiful. I want to work on that other, whatever it is, 80%, 60%, 70% of the image that isn't the bird. So it's very important when you're in the field to find a bird that is removed from the background. This is not easy because we can't tell them where to go. But you want at least 10 feet, maybe 15 feet between where the bird is and the background. You want enough distance, and you want to, if you have an f4 lens, it helps to shoot at f4 because you're going to have much more blurred background. So the greater the distance between the bird and the background, the softer and more complementary that background is going to be. And for me, it's more important on the bird. And I just put, yes, I said it. The new cameras are so good that it's almost not an accomplishment to get a sharp photo of a bird. For me, it's the autofocus is so good. They're so light. They're so fast. It's easy enough to get a photo of a bird. It's much more difficult to get a photo of a bird with a beautiful background. So you could take any bird photo, and if you put it against a brick wall, as opposed to a beautiful blurred background, it's a completely different photo. So when you add on the element of not just the bird needing to be shot at the right angle with the right head angle and the right sun angle, but also the background, it becomes a much more difficult photo to get. Let's go over some examples. This is an American robin photographed in peak fall colors. I found a tree where the birds were feeding on crab apples. Background is a distant tree in New York City that was orange and red. You have out of focus berries. You have a bird looking right at you. So you have the orange tones of the robin, which match tones of the background. It adds beauty. That those colors add to the photo. Again, this is a completely different photo if you have a concrete background or anything else. Here's a Wilson's phalarope photographed in Utah at the Great Salt Lake. There are millions of these little brine flies at the Great Salt Lake. And there was probably a couple thousand Wilson's phalarope right in front of me. The problem is that they were so concentrated and so many flies that when you laid down at water level, you couldn't get a clean photo. What I did is I stood up and actually stood on an elevated area a little bit and waited for the birds to fly. When I was there, the lake was very dry. And so the background here is a dried out section of the Salt Lake with water and exposed sandbars. Again, the background completely adds to the photo. If this background had 45 other out of focus blobs of Wilson's phalaropes and 1,000 flies in it, it wouldn't be the same photo. Here's the yellow-headed blackbird, also photographed in Utah. These birds tend to stick in Phragmites or be near the edges of Phragmites. I photographed this bird. It was feeding in a field. It was removed maybe 50 feet from the background. It was feeding, flying, in sort of a direct line. So I positioned myself ahead of where I expected it to fly and was able to capture this photo of it flying along with a beautiful golden background taken just before sunset. Pine siskin, photographed in Staten Island, feeding. Again, late fall. The background is a tree which turns pink in the fall. I go and visit this tree as much as possible because it just really adds to the photo. It elevates the photo when you get these pink soft hues in the background and makes it something much prettier. Again, this bird is probably not more than 10, 15% of the full photo that you're looking at. The other 90%, to me, you have to work as much as possible to make as beautiful as possible. The last example is a dark-eyed junco photographed in the fall on the beaches in New Jersey. It's perch atop goldenrod. I'll keep pounding in the other points. The sun is right at my back. It's looking at me. The sun is low in the sky. You could draw a straight line. The background is a field of goldenrod. It just enhances the photo. The soft yellows, the out of focus flowers. those are things that to my eye are extremely pleasing. The types of photos I'm trying to get. That Junco sitting on maybe a dead stick, that Junco sitting on something else, it's not the same photo. And it's certainly not the same photo without that clean, soft, muted, and colorful background. So we've gone over your shooting angle, how that affects things. We've gone over your background and how it affects things. Now let's talk about composition. What is your composition? It's how the visual elements are arranged in the frame, technically, where your bird is, where everything else is, and also the relation of the bird to the surroundings. Let's talk about that briefly. I always want to give the bird some room. I don't like photos too tight. If you have a bird that's facing to the right, I'd like to give him room to the right to look into. If you have a bird that's facing down somewhat, I want to give him room to look down. So I would position the bird facing right on the left part of the frame to give it some room. And I'll say this again, to me, it's more important than the bird. As silly as that may sound to some, the composition and the background are the things that can make or break a photo. You can have the same bird in the same pose with the same sun angle, but if you put that bird positioned with the right composition and the right background, you really elevated the photo. Let's take this black-chin hummingbird, photographed in Utah. We found a field of wildflowers. We were able to get low. I have a bird beautifully positioned inside a bunch of wildflowers. We picked these because specifically the gorget of the bird matches the flowers, and how it's the whole thing is composed is exactly what I'm looking for a hummingbird. I don't personally like really tight and frame, just a hummingbird and nothing else. I like looking at a beautiful scene. Again, we're making art. We're making something that's pleasing to the eye, and the bird should be adding to the art as well as where it is. I know people that travel to see fall colors or people that travel to see blooming flowers. And so I try to incorporate as much of that as possible into the photos because I think it really adds to the photos. Here is a tufted titmouse photographed in the fall in New York. Again, composition, it's at eye level, it's singing, it's on a nice perch with berries. There's a muted fall colored background. These types of shots takes a lot of planning. You have to know where the birds are. You have to know where you can have that sort of background. The bird needs to be composed in the right way. And I'll add that with these new mirrorless cameras, a shot like this is far easier than it used to be, because with the focus points, you can compose in camera and get that exactly the way you want. And it's very simple. Here's a yellow-throated warbler. Again, talking about composition. If you know these birds, you know they nest in pine forests. Typically, they're way high up. I found a tree where one was visiting. It was the only blooming tree around. I stood there for about 6 hours waiting for this bird to come back. It made 5 visits, and on the 6th visit, it came to that spot. Again, I'm looking for a beautiful photo. I'm looking for the composition to add to the photo, to add beauty, to add interest. And so a warbler with bright yellow and deep black in a soft bed of cherry flowers is a much more interesting photo than something else would be if that bird was just sitting in a pine tree. Here's a prothonotary warbler photographed in Virginia. This bird was feeding at the edge of a swamp. At the edge of the swamp, there were some ornamental plantings. I keep bringing up the stuff from the past. He's looking right at me. I've got the right head angle. It's in flowers. It has a soft background. Doesn't detract from the photo. There's nothing harsh. There's no shadows. There's no anything. This is, the sort of thing I keep saying it, but I'm always looking out for. I'm always out looking for these types of opportunities and situations. Here's a prairie warbler, also photographed in Virginia. Again, composed. The bird is on the left side, looking to the right. He's looking at me, surrounded by beautiful green leaves, purple flowers. This is what I'm looking for always. There's a snowy owl photographed at sunset. Just want to point out that I was not 100% with the sun at my back at this point, because this was taken about 3 minutes before sunset, and my shadow was so long that it was hitting the bird. So I actually moved myself just to the right a little bit so that my shadow wouldn't be in the photo. It was really soft late evening light. If you've ever photographed owls, you know that they're very sensitive to light. They don't like opening their eyes. But when you photograph them late with the sun at your back, you just get a beautiful scene. I have a nice clean part of the beach. It's perched on a nice little sand clump, which adds interest. It's looking right at me. These are all things that when you're in the field and you're composing your photos, that you want to be on the lookout. You want to be on the lookout for the right background, the right shooting angle, the right light angle, and then something that will really elevate the photo. Now, mind your P's and Q's. That's in the talk. Let's go over what they are. P's are your perch. Your Q's are your image and your light quality. Again, these are things you've got to get right in the field. Can't fix it in Photoshop. There's no fix for your perch. So let's go over your perch or your surroundings. They need to be beautiful, in my opinion. The more beautiful, the more complex, the better. The more it's less of a bird on a dead stick, and it's more of a beautiful nature photo, which is what we're trying to create. And to me, it's the best way to set your photo apart from the rest. Like I've said many times, if the bird is 20% of the photo, if the other 80% of your photo is beautiful, if the other 80% of your photo is more interesting, then it elevates the photo to a completely different level. And because bird photography is so difficult, if you can get that element added and that element is right, it completely sets the photo apart from the rest. So let's go over some photos here. We'll talk about a perch. Most woodpecker photos are on the side of a tree. This hairy woodpecker was photographed in upstate New York. It was feeding on a spruce tree. It was snowing. Again, I'm at eye level. It's looking at me. To me, it's a far more interesting photo because rather than a woodpecker on the side of a tree, which is nice, but I've seen thousands of those photos. I've seen very few photos of woodpeckers on something like this. Here's an evening grosbeak photographed late in the spring on I think it's a cherry blossom that had already mostly bloomed. Again, these birds nest in boreal forests. You don't have these types of perches normally. Most of the photos of them are in winter, or they're on a spruce tree, they're on something different. I've got a bird looking at me. I've got a bird at eye level. Got a bird on a beautiful, interesting perch with the remnants of some flowers, with nice green leaves. Really adds to your photo. That perch is a completely different photo if it's just a stick. Here I've got an eastern bluebird photographed this spring. When I saw this tree, my heart stopped. I said, you know what? This is awesome. I don't know what that is, but when the bluebird landed there, I couldn't believe it. Again, the colors, the pinks, the flowers, the soft muted background, those are the things that really elevate the photo to a completely different level. You know, this bluebird perched anywhere else is not the same type of photo. Here I've got a Canada jay, photographed in the winter in upstate New York. Again, it's snowing. It's on a beautiful perch with cones. It's looking at me. It's at eye level. It's all the things I keep going over, that in the field, you have to be concentrating on. It's not just see bird, take photo. It's how do we get this bird in the place where it'll produce the best photo or the type of photo that you're looking to get. For me, perch is one of the major determining factors. Here's a spotted sandpiper photographed recently. If you know how spotted sandpipers act, they will go to the highest ground and sing, and then they'll go and do a display flight if you're on their breeding grounds, and they fly back and forth, and they have some calls that they do, display flights. So I got myself in position for what would be the highest ground. Thankfully, it was a beautiful bed of these flowers. Bird came back, sang on the flowers. The perch and the surroundings. Again, if this was a spotted sandpiper on just a dark, muddy bank, if this was a spotted sandpiper 2 feet from the edge of a marsh with harsh phragmite lines going up and down, it's not the same photo. The surroundings with the soft, beautiful background of the bird standing in a bed of flowers. This is what I'm always looking for. I'm out looking for perches, for beautiful places. And then you need to figure out either how to get the bird there, or you need to, figure out the best time and the best place, or the best time to be there to get the photo that you want. So we've done the P's, which is perch. Now let's do Q's, which is quality. Quality is two things. It's image quality, which comes from getting your exposure right and proper processing. Again, those are a separate talk. You got to get it right in the camera. I mean, these new cameras are pretty good where you can raise exposure a little bit in Photoshop and Lightroom, or, you can use some noise reduction software to make some changes. But the closer you are to getting it right in the camera, the better your image quality is going to be. The other quality is light quality. I want to talk about that a little bit. If I'm photographing anything in the open, if it's a waterfowl, if it's a shorebird, if it's something that lives in a field, I'm photographing in the first hour of the day or the last hour of the day. I want golden, beautiful light. Really brings out the colors. You don't get harsh shadows. If I'm photographing in a forest, if I'm going to breeding grounds for warblers or something like that, I want overcast. I want because you don't get golden light in the forest. So I don't want harsh shadows. I don't want my backgrounds to be dark and light, which should be distracting. I want some nice, even overcast light that'll help produce a more pleasing photo. Let's go over some examples. Here's a black skimmer, photographed very close to sunrise. It's a nice photo. It's well exposed. He's doing something interesting. Has a nice sand dune background. To me, this is my photo. It's not all that memorable. It's just a decent photo of a black skimmer. Now, talking about quality, the quality of the light can change the photo dramatically. Here's essentially the same pose of a black skimmer photographed, as opposed to me having the sun at my back, me having the sun at my face. This was photographed at sunrise. The light quality completely changes the photo. I have the same pose, the same open mouth where he's yelling at another skimmer to get out of his little territory. But having the sun in my face, again, produced a totally different image. To me, a more memorable image. Here's a shot of a sanderling, basically full breeding plumage. Late in the day, you can see the shadow behind it pointing straight back. I'm right on the sun angle. I'm at eye level with this bird, laying down in the wet sand and doing all the things I've talked about. It's a nice photo. Just want to reiterate how changing the quality of the light can have a drastic impact on the photo. Here's another sanderling, where as opposed to me photographing the bird with the sun at my back, again, I'm photographing with the sun just about in my face. Leads to a completely different photo. You get the sun coming through, you get the beautiful hints of sun coming around the edges of the bird, you get the bokeh balls about on the left-hand side. It's a completely different photo where the quality of that light from either early morning facing into the sun or early morning to late evening with the sun at your back has a big impact on the photo. And whenever you're going out looking for a bird to photograph, I want you to be cognizant of what it is that you want to photograph. I always have it in my head. I don't go out and just hope I run into a bird and to photograph. I go out with a species in mind. I make lists prior to a season. Okay, this year I want to photograph these species of warblers or this species of shorebird or whatever it is that's my target. and I go out in the field with a shot in mind and try to execute it. And that way you can get rid of all the distractions. If you go to a heron rookery, you don't want to try to photograph every bird that goes by because you'll be constantly changing your exposure, and maybe you'll miss the shot you were truly after. Here's an eastern screech owl that was fairly heavily photographed at a local place in New Jersey. When I was there was about 20 people there, maybe more. I was the only person that had a remote shutter. This bird didn't open its eyes really wide until 44 minutes after sunset. This photo was taken 44 minutes after sunset. I was able to get it properly exposed because I had my camera on a tripod. I had a remote shutter in my hand. I could barely even see what the bird was doing with my eyes, but I was able to get, because of proper exposure, I was able to get a photo of this screech owl, eyes open, exactly the way I wanted to get it. And again, I just wanted to give some examples about how the quality of the light, even 44 minutes after sunset, which in theory should be pretty poor light to shoot in, can produce a really good photo. Now the X factor. I've mentioned this a bunch. When I'm in the field, again, I'm looking for the right spot to get a photo. It could be the side of the road. It could be anywhere. It doesn't have to be a beautiful, pristine wilderness. I'm looking to get a photo at the right level with the bird, with the right head angle, with the right background, with the right composition. And then I'm looking for something else as well, what I'm calling an X factor. Always looking out for something that can make the photo special. Maybe it's action or dynamic pose. Maybe it's an interaction between species. Maybe it's some sort of just beautiful scenery or special light conditions or prey item. So we'll go over a few last examples. Here's the Rivley's hummingbird photographed in Arizona. Quickly, I was there in November. There were very few flowers, and there was lots of competition for the nectar. I got there and saw that the flowers are sort of dried up and ugly. So the photo I would normally be after, which would be the hummingbird feeding on the flowers, wasn't possible. But because there was bees and hummingbirds, I quickly changed what I wanted, which was to get a photo of the two interacting. And that's what this is. It's a photo of a family of pileated woodpeckers. I've got mom, 3 babies, all with their mouths open, all looking towards me. It's, again, the exact type of photo I'm looking for. It just gives that extra wow factor, that extra X factor. Here's another photo of the American kestrel, the same female. If you look closely, she's carrying a white-throated sparrow in her talons. I'll reiterate, this is right at eye level. I have a soft, beautiful background. She's staring right at me. She's flying, and she has her talons wrapped around a white-throated sparrow. Here's an American oyster catcher with a baby, early morning light. We have eye contact. We have interaction between the adult and the baby where they're sort of nuzzling beaks. The little shoot of grass or plant growing on the right-hand side, the soft background, all of those things are just X factors that you when together, combined, they add to make a really beautiful, memorable, more engaging photo. Here's a Baltimore oriole. We have lots of beautiful blooming azaleas in New York City. Most of them are small, and they grow in about 1,000 different directions, so it's almost impossible to get a good photo. I mentioned I go scouting all the time. I found a place where I can get photos with some big, old, sturdy azaleas. It's had this beautiful arch. Baltimore oriole landed there. You just don't see these types of photos with these pinks and magentas and these types of hues with an oriole sitting there at eye level looking at me. There's a black-bellied whistling duck photographed just before sunset. Again, if you photograph it in that gold water, it's already a really nice photo. When you get it in the gold water with the wings up, he was preening. Again, I knew it was probably going to flap its wings because that's what ducks do. I made sure I raised my shutter speed. I made sure I was far enough back so that when it lifted its wings, I wouldn't clip them or they wouldn't be out of the frame. And I was able to capture what I think is a really memorable photo with eye contact, with action, with light, with background. Here is Whitetail ptarmigan, photographed in the mountains of Utah. Quickly, we were up there and it was cloudy. It was supposed to be full sun. You could see on the horizon, there was a few minutes where there was going to be bright golden sun. And so we stayed, even though we had to hike down about 2 hours in the complete dark and there was no trail. I stayed because I wanted the shot like this. I didn't expect to get a flight shot, but the bird took off calling, going to where its evening roost was. And we were able to capture what I think is a fantastic flight shot of a white-tailed ptarmigan calling, looking right at me, soft, beautiful alpine tundra background. Here is a cedar waxwing, photographed in the same tree as that American robin was from earlier, an isolated perch, nothing distracting in the background. If you've watched waxwings feed, they will take a berry, rip it off, and then often they'll flip it in the air. I knew that was going to happen. I upped my shutter speed. I was able to capture it just as the start of the flip of the berry, which again really adds to the photo. Here's a great gray owl. I went to Idaho to photograph great gray owls. The one shot I really wanted was this shot, what I call the trees have eyes, which shows how well they get camouflaged. I was at eye level with the bird. He's looking right at me. You can see how well it just blends in. You know, from 20 feet farther back, you wouldn't know the bird was there. Their camouflage is really amazing. And I think that a photo like this really tells the story of what great gray owls do to stay hidden. Is a blackbirdian warbler on English hawthorn, which I think is probably the prettiest tree that we have. Those little red flowers are just amazing to me. I was able to photograph this blackbirdian warbler on them. Again, that sort of beautiful perch adds to the photo, tells more of a story of what these warblers do, and really adds to making a beautiful art. 2 photos left. I've got a snowy owl photographed in the snow. I knew it was going to snow that day. I knew there was an owl at the beach. I got there maybe an hour before sunrise, found the snowy owl in the dark, looked around until I could actually see it. It was very hard to find in the snow. Slowly crawled into position, was able to photograph the owl as it got brighter in the snow, laying down right at its level. Again, that sort of the snow, the background, the ocean really add to the photo. And I'll end up with, here's a downy woodpecker. Downy woodpecker photographed again on azaleas. This old stand of azaleas has a couple of really nice wreath type openings in it. And I waited there a long time. And this downy woodpecker came and landed, looked right at me. Again, when you have pink backgrounds, the wreath, it's the kind of shot you just don't see often. But when the goal is creating art as opposed to just photographing a bird, these are the types of opportunities that present themselves, and these are the type of opportunities you have to be out looking for. So thank you for attending. Thank you for listening. This is my phone number. You can follow me on Instagram at Isaac A. Grant. I am available for private lessons. If you like and you're interested, let me know. And that's it.
Now that I'm not on mute. Hi, Isaac. That was great.
Thank you.
Awesome. That yeah, that was an excellent presentation. I actually have a couple of questions of my own, but I am not going to take the thunder away from the attendees that have come to watch you speak. So
Okay.
let's hit the ground running with a couple of their questions first. Can you give more information? This is Laura watching on Zoom. Can you give more information on the ground pod you used? While you were speaking, and I saw the question, I believe it is the Naturescapes SKM2
Yes.
skimmer
Yes.
pod.
Yes, that's it. And I use a tripod head on it so that I can just, and I have an extra head where the ground pod with the head attached to sit in my car. So I can just put the camera on it and go.
Great. All right, so that is one of the more easy to answer questions. Anne Marie from Zoom asks, if I understand correctly, it sounds like you pick your back. Oh, wait, no, sorry. Anne-Marie, we're actually going to get to your question in a second. Jeff Schwartz asks from Zoom, what type of post-processing do you do?
Well, I try to keep it to a minimum. I use Lightroom to do some basic adjustments, highlight, shadows, maybe a little vibrance, saturation or exposure. I use the new masking tool in Lightroom decent amount. Just if there's, a section or maybe the bird is a little bit overexposed or underexposed, if you have a bird with a lot of white and black or something like that, maybe you have to make some localized adjustments. And then I bring them into Photoshop to do a little bit of levels and curves. I like one of the Nick filters a little bit. I add a little warmth if it's needed. And that's about it. I try to get it as right in the field as possible. If you have to do any cloning or anything like that, I do that in Photoshop. But again, the goal is to not do any of that. The goal is to get it as close to perfect in camera. But the simple answer is Lightroom for some, some sliders, and Photoshop for a bit of contrast, and levels, curves, that sort of thing.
All right, great. Sue, watching from Vimeo, is asking, where in New England do you photograph your birds most?
Well, I live in New York City. Yeah, I mean, mostly just because of proximity. It's Staten Island or New York City. I don't go to in fact, I only have photos, I think one photo from New England of common loons on a lake in New Hampshire. But yeah, mostly just local spots, and these are not pristine, beautiful spots. I mean, if you're shooting with a long lens, the 600 millimeter lens, or a zoom that goes out to 600, 150 to 600 type lens, you don't need to have that much room in order to get a really nice photo. Blurred background can be just a couple of feet of a bush or anything like that. So again, depending on the types of birds I'm looking for, it might be a local field that no one goes to. It might be, a little area of salt marsh, anything like that. There's not one particular place, because I photographed probably around 300 species of birds. So they're all in different places.
Cool. R&D from Vimeo is asking, do you use bird calls to get birds at eye level?
On occasion, depending on the species, sure, that's something that people do quite a bit. It's not always necessary, and with the right amount of scouting and things like that, it's not always needed. But have I done it? Absolutely. Yeah. Again, it's something I try to stay away from, and it's only things that you would need, like shorebirds. You don't need to. Ducks, you don't need to. They're at your eye level. There are places where warblers and songbirds come down really low. Like I have one of the photos in there of a warbling vireo. The bird is just feeding low. With enough scouting and enough luck, you can do that. But certainly using calls is another method, another tool that people can use to get not necessarily where you want them to land, but they will come lower.
We actually have a lot of questions rolling in. So there are 4 people asked a question that seems very related to each other.
Okay.
So I'd hate to say kill 2 birds with 1 stone. So
sure.
How do you shoot 4 birds with 1 camera? Who says it the best? If I understand correctly, it sounds like you pick your backgrounds and perches and then sit and wait as long as it takes for a bird to land where you want it. How often are you successful? That is, how often do you compose the shot and then have a bird land where you want it to land? It seems
so. There's a very low success rate with that sort of thing, right? It's much easier to just take a picture than it is to get all of those other components correct. There are times where you can get very lucky. One of the photos I showed was a yellow-throated warbler. I was actually photographing an eastern bluebird in that tree, and the yellow-throated warbler just showed up. Took me 6 hours of waiting for it to land there, but it kept coming back, because it was a flowering tree and there was lots of bugs feeding on the flowers, and so the warbler was coming back to feed on the bugs. But there's a much lower success rate, significantly lower. If I had to put a number on it, it's probably 95% more difficult to get a really good photo with all of those components correct than it is just to see something, take photo.
Some Protye watching on Zoom actually had a bonus question to that. Do you ever do anything to lure them to the perch at all? And thoughts on the ethics of that regardless?
The ethics is the tough one. I don't mind. I actually think that, and I don't know that I really want to get into this too much, but I think whenever we're in nature, we're intruding somewhat, right? You take a walk through the park, you're flushing birds. You take a walk on the beach, you're flushing shorebirds or gulls, things like that. My personal stance is, I think rather than waiting in a bird's territory for 5 hours, say, for it to go where you wanted, if you played a call and it landed there in 2 minutes and you walked away, I think that's a lot less intrusive. So have I done it? Yes, absolutely. What do I think on the ethics? I think either way, you're being somewhat intrusive. I think the lesser of the two evils is to get in and get out.
Let's see. John, watching on Vimeo, asks, where do you usually shoot? You have such a great diversity of trees in your photos.
Again, I go looking for perches and stuff. I go looking for the place to photograph the birds, all around the city, places in Jersey, you know, places that are closer to where I live. Obviously, a lot of the photos are there. That's the hard part. You know, the birds are the easy part. As silly as it may sound, finding a bird and getting a photo of a bird, especially with an A1 or, you know, a Z9 or one of these cameras that's just so fast and so good. Getting a photo is the easy part. The hard part is, how do you get all those other components to work together to get it to work? I walk my dog a lot and look. You know, I spend a lot of time birding over the years. I mean, I've literally birded my whole life, so I lean on that knowledge. You know, I had a friend recently who asked me, oh, well, where do I go to photograph a grasshopper sparrow? I told him the exact field. You go here, drop them a pin, the bird was right there. You know, I've been to those fields, I don't know how many times, hundreds of times, you know, I mean, and so I try to use that knowledge as a tool. And that tool is to help you get, you know, better photos, because photography is hard. You know, it's really hard to get all those things to line up. Yeah.
Sue from Vimeo is asking, what camera mode are you using? Manual? Are you leaning on auto ISO?
Always shoot on manual. Don't use auto ISO. I'd like to control everything. I have the A1 set where you can control with just a dial, the ISO and the shutter speed, and the dial in the front for the f-stop, and that's it. And so, you know, I'm always cognizant of what the light is. I'm checking my exposure, which again, with these new mirrorless cameras, you can see in camera. You know, it's so much easier to get a good photo. You don't have to take a photo and then look at the back of the camera and hope you don't need reading glasses to actually see it. You just look in, you can see your exposure perfectly, but always manual. And I'm always thinking, you know, the second there's any sort of change in the light, I'm changing my exposure so that when something happens, I don't miss it.
Bill from Zoom's asking about tripod usage, question mark. I'm gonna guess, I know you've talked about hand holding, and I know you've talked about the ground pod.
I do everything. Oh yeah. I mean, if it's like, for instance, if it was photographed from that kestrel flying around, you can't do that with a tripod because they're really small and fast falcons. You got to be able to just, you know, move quickly. If it's like, if you're sitting waiting for something to land, yeah, sure, use a tripod. I mean, I'm not that big and strong where I can hold that, you know, for all that time. But yeah, sure, I have an old tripod that I use all the time. That's always in the trunk, you know, tripods in the trunk, the ground pods in the trunk. Other things that I didn't even talk about.
Oh, yeah, actually, here there's a question. How do you get eye level shots of birds perched in trees? From your talk, I know that at a certain level, it's going to be, you know, eye level to you directly when you're standing on the ground. But I remember when we first started talking, there was a situation that you had one of those tools in your trunk. If you could share.
I have, well, so I mean, I keep a stepladder in my car at all times.
Yeah, that was it.
You know, I drive a 2-door convertible. My trunk's not all that big and it's packed with gear. You know, I keep the simple answer is, if it's higher than my stepladder goes, I don't. I just walk away. The beauty is I've been a birder my whole life, so I like seeing the birds, and if I can get a photo, great. If it's not the kind of photo I'm after, I just don't even try. Either it comes low or I didn't get the photo. So after a certain difference, I don't take the photo. But I keep other things, and that could certainly be a different talk at some point. Tools for the trade,
Right.
elbow and knee pads, waterproof gear, cold weather gear, gloves, all those things that you really help capture the photos. Muck boots, any of those things that I use all the time to walk through knee-high water or waders. I have photos I didn't show where I took in the winter on waist high in ocean water, and then dead of winter, hiding in rocks, photograph sea ducks and stuff. So I don't, after a certain height, I just don't photograph them. And what do I use? My ladder. If I can't, if it's not there, I don't do it.
I was out ever since we talked about that. I was wondering, what are the conditions for bringing the ladder? And then just now, I realized the ladder just comes with you all the time. It's whether or not you're taking it out of the trunk. So
that's it. It's
awesome.
Me. Yeah, nice. Being prepared is vital. I mean, if you don't have it with you, because you may just happen into a really great opportunity. And if you don't have the gear with you, or you've got to crawl through 15 feet of goose poop to get it, and you're in nice clothes, you're going to miss that operatunity. Gotcha. I keep waterproof. I keep just coveralls that I can zip up that are waterproof, and I don't care what I crawl through. Just wipe them off and I'm done. But it's because I have it with me.
Yeah. Forgive my ignorance, but Srinath from Zoom is asking, do you use playback for bringing in the birds? I'm not sure what playback is.
Yeah, he means playing a call. I have. Okay. Yeah, I have certain species. The key is to try not to do it all that much for me. But there are certain species I've done it? Sure. What I use a lot more is experience, the birding my whole life, knowing where, when, why, and how, knowing each species' tendencies, knowing how close you can get, knowing how shy they are, and knowing where they are and what their feeding habits and things are. That leads to a lot more photos. Have there been birds that I've called in? Absolutely. What a lot of people do is they'll set up stuff near a bird feeder even. You have stuff coming in, they'll just get something pretty and put it next to a bird feeder, and birds just land there. A lot of birds don't respond to calls at all. And there are birds that you can call 1,000 times that don't care at all. Have I done it? Absolutely. Does it work? Sometimes.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Like you said, bird photography is hard.
Yeah, it's sometimes.
Yeah. We have Arnie from Vimeo asking, I have many bird photos that I would like to tag with metadata containing the bird name and species. What is the easiest way to identify birds correctly?
Birds correctly. All right. So I'm going to get old school on this. I'm 50, right? Get a field guide and go out and look, right? I'm real old school when it comes to birds. There's no substitute for, although there are apps for this now. There's apps you can just put your iPhone up and it'll tell you everything that's singing. Not always correct. And there are apps so you can upload a photo and it'll tell you what the bird is in Merlin, for instance. I don't think that that's necessarily the best way. For me, the best way is spend time in the field. Look with binoculars, learn the birds, watch what they're doing, watch when they do it, watch why they do it, watch how close you can get, and all those things are tools. I have a good friend that talks about this all the time. There are so many factors that have to lead to a really good quality photo. The light, the weather, the wind, the shooting angle, the head angle, the perch, the background. If just one is messed up, you lost the photo, right? And so the bird knowledge is really, to me, there's no replacing it. I mean, if I was hired to photograph a baseball game, I better know the rules, right? I mean, I've watched baseball my whole life, so I know the rules, but I need to know what to anticipate. I need to know what's going to happen. I need to know where the ball is going to be thrown. Bird photography is the same. So I don't think there's any way that's better than getting out in nature with binoculars and a book or a real good app or a friend that knows, and just spending time.
Great. I know that you have the 600 and the 400.
Yes.
Sobro is asking, do you ever use a zoom lens or is it prime all the time?
I do not own any zoom lenses. I have in the past. I started with Canon and I had a Tamron 150 to 600 and I switched to the Sigma 150 to 600. I then sold them and bought the 100 to 400. all my Canon gear was stolen, which is a long story. I then switched to Nikon, where I had a zoom very briefly, 80 to 400. I didn't really like that lens. Friend of mine bought it because he goes to Africa a lot, and for him it was perfect. And with Sony, I did have the zoom for a little bit. I had the 200 to 600. I just didn't use it. Compared to the it's a fantastic lens. It's light. It's really sharp. It's not the 600 f4, and I'm fortunate enough where I have the 600 f4, and I like simplicity. I like having one camera and one lens, and just knowing what I'm going to shoot and then shooting it. And so, for most situations, the zoom is not necessary, but there are times where it absolutely is. There are times where birds just get really close. I had it happen recently where I had my 600 and some bird just came super close, and the person next to me had a zoom, and they were able to get some photos that I wasn't. So like anything with photography, it's a compromise, right?
Yeah.
You know, the light's always a compromise. If you
Which
raise
one?
your speed, you know, you don't have as much exposure. So the lens.
Which aspect are you willing to trade in for the shot?
Right.
Basically?
So I go with keeping my 600 with me at all times. Once in a blue moon, I take the 400 out.
All right. All right. So the last question is Matt from Vimeo, but it actually sort of ties into the question I had. When specifically out for photography, do you detach from maintaining bird list of the day? Are you carrying binoculars with you?
I never detach from birding. And I think that's actually what got me into photography. Was I was out in the day looking for fall migrants out at the beach, and I was watching locally pretty unusual clay-colored sparrow, because I was sitting down at the edge of a field after the morning flight, and I said, you know what, it'd be cool to get a picture of that, because I was sitting and it came right to me. When you're standing and you're walking, you're this big giant thing. When you're just sitting down in the grass and not moving, the bird just came right out in the open. And was right and too close to. I mean, if I had a lens, I couldn't focus on the thing. It was 3 feet away. So no, I always I don't always do an eBird checklist if I'm out taking pictures, but I'm always taking notes. Right, I'm always keeping a mental log of what I saw, where I saw it, when it was, because you never know when you need to call on that. And it's happened more times than I can mention where I was out looking for something. I went to a salt marsh to try to photograph a bird called a seaside sparrow. And they weren't playing ball. They just were way out in the marsh and didn't come close and didn't anything. Meanwhile, a clapper rail was calling loudly and walked out onto an old piece of driftwood log right in front of me. So I'm always paying attention to what's there. And I shifted gears and said, okay, forget the sparrow, because I got this secretive rail sitting calling on a log right in front of me. And switch to that, and wound up getting some really cool photos of that.
Cool.
So I don't always do an eBird list, but I'm always listening and watching. And even when I'm photographing something, my ears, you know, listening for what's around. And I think that's a really vital tool. You know, it's just having the ability to do that saves a lot of time. You know, I know it's there. I know what's calling. I know the sounds. And even if it's something I've never really seen, I know what the similar birds in that family are like, right? I was out in Utah. I was looking for a bird called gray vireo. I'd never seen a gray vireo before, but I've seen every other type of vireo in North America. And so I knew what this vireo was going to do. I knew where it was going to be. I knew how to photograph it. I'm always paying attention.
Nice. All right. Well, we've only gone a little bit over, but that was because all our attendees had so many great questions. So thank you very much. Isaac, that was wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us here. Anyone that wants to watch this over again, it'll be available on all our channels. And my name's Fred, and thanks so much for joining us. Thanks again, Isaac, and I hope you guys all have a great day.